From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. I am Nick Barris. We're joining you today on a Wednesday, and we're glad to have you with us. We've got a good show on tap for you. We're going to take your phone calls. As you know, we oftentimes, I have once a month, we have Clint Kelly on with us to talk about malpractice, whether or not you feel you've been done wrong in a hospital, in a surgery, with a doctor. And there's some real basics you need to be aware of if you want to look into a situation like that. And you'd be surprised how many people go to the doctor and sometimes wonder, did something go wrong? Are you one of them? Do you know someone? We'll get the number up on the screen. There it is, 737-7587. If you want to call in, ask some questions and inquire, always an interesting conversation. Look, I don't feel as though I've been victimized in malpractice myself, but every time Clint comes on, I learn something from him. And so he's here today. Clint Kelly.
Good morning to you.
Good morning to you, friend. It's nice to have you on. Usually it's just you and me.
It is.
But we have an extra guest on this morning, with us this morning. She is a registered nurse, Kathy Farrell. Good morning to you,
Good morning.
Kathy. Thank you for coming on. I'm going to let Clint explain why we have a registered nurse on set with us today.
Well, Nick, this is a special morning. As you know, in the previous shows, we have consistently referred to Nurse Farrell, who is a legal nurse consultant on staff at our office. And many times we'll get callers and I'll say, well, will you please call my office and ask to speak to Nurse Farrell?
Sure.
And she'll take your information and she'll report back to me what she thinks about the merits of a potential claim. And I thought it would be a good idea to bring her here today so that our audience actually gets to see her and hear her. She's extremely intelligent and knowledgeable in her field, and I think it would be something that the callers might be able in the future to put a face to a name. In fact,
absolutely.
they will be able to do that, and I think that's beneficial.
So she's the one you talk to oftentimes when you call your office, because you're not always there necessarily, where people, she kind of evaluates whether they have a legit case.
That's true. I mean, she is the expertise behind the investigation, or the screening. I don't make that decision on my own. I have her review the case, and then she'll contact me after she's written basically a summary, a report of what she thinks about the claim.
That's
And
good,
if she believes the claim deserves further investigation or believes the claim should go forward, I will then send the case to a medical expert, or in some situations, Kathy will find a medical expert for us to actually do the review and serve as an expert if the case has merit. But, you know, I lean on her to make these medical and nursing decisions because I handle the legal aspect of it.
Right. You know what? I'm glad you brought her, because we've talked about you so often,
Thank you.
Kathy, and you know, it's nice to finally meet you. So you take these calls. I'm just curious, you know, when you get them, what is it that you need to get to the heart of pretty quickly when you talk to these callers about their case, to give you an idea of whether or not it's something that he could really sink his teeth into?
Well, I ask them a lot of their background, first of all, but then I want to know what the actual injury was. What happened that makes you think that you have a case? And I want to know what happened, who was involved, the names of the hospitals, the doctors, the nurses who might be involved, and when it happened, so that we know whether we will have time enough to file a suit. But I really want to know, kind of in a nutshell, did you get hurt? Did you get injured? What happened in your case? And I try to lean them toward or lead them to telling me what their injury was, not whether they were upset with the doctor because he was rude to them or he didn't listen to them. But I tried to get them to the point to be able to tell me exactly, did they suffer an injury, or they suffer pain, or did their diagnosis get missed somehow, and they ended up going from one doctor to another doctor to another doctor until they were finally diagnosed. I try to find the medical issues quickly.
And as a nurse, so you're able, I mean, having been in the medical field, to sometimes hear of a condition or something, and right off the bat, maybe just because of your background, you can say, okay, this is something that may be a fertile ground. Okay, this is the kind of thing I've heard before or seen happen before.
Right, I do. I've seen cases, you know, that go from having a fall when you're not being cared for correctly, and falling, or medications that are given, the wrong medication is given at the wrong time. You have you know, an unusual reaction to the medication that nobody is monitoring, and they don't know that there's been an error in the medication. We've had several cases where things went wrong in the surgery. Sometimes things go wrong in the surgery and
Right.
nobody did anything
Sure.
improper. But there are times when things go wrong in the surgery because there was not care. There was carelessness.
Oh, I've seen some of those cases with
Yes.
Clint. Yeah, the ones where clearly there was something done wrong. All right. I want to go over some of the basics, and then I want to ask you about some of your recent cases as well that may resonate with some of our viewers, because you talked about medicines and medications and things like this. The number is 737-7587. Now, she did touch on what we always say at the beginning of the show, Clint. Part of her job is, once she figures out there may be a case here, is asking, when the heck did this happen? Remind folks again, if you're sitting there wondering, oh, you know, I don't feel like calling Nick right now, or, you know, checking with Clint because I'll just put it off. Why don't you not want to put it off?
Because there's a 1-year statute of limitations in Tennessee.
Right, okay.
You have 1 year from the date that you discover your injury or discover that there's been negligence in which to send pre-suit notice. What Kathy will do is she will detect when she believes that negligence occurred, and then when she reports back to me, I'll make the legal decision as to whether or not I believe the claim falls within the 1-year statute. So, as we've said many, many times, if you think or a family member of yours has been the victim of medical negligence or bad care, pick up the phone and call me, because the call is free. You pay nothing unless I recover money for you.
Okay, and we should say too, there's a handful of certified malpractice attorneys. There are lots of attorneys that may say they can handle these types of cases, and maybe they can, but you're just one of a few in the state, right?
That's correct.
That are certified.
There's about 20 of us across the state. Plaintiff, medical malpractice lawyers, in other words, those who represent patients, and defense, those who represent hospitals and doctors. And we have to go through a process in which we have to pass an oral examination, a written examination, and we have to have a certain amount of jury trials of experience handling these cases in trial before we can get certified.
Okay, so important to look at that, someone who specializes in something like this. And again, can you give us the definition of what malpractice is? How does it define? As she said, and we've talked about, just because you get a negative result from a visit to the doctor, sometimes, you know, they're not miracle workers. So how do you know whether or not it's just, hey, this unfortunately didn't work out, or, yeah, this was malpractice?
From a layman's standpoint, it's really a bad medical mistake that causes a really bad injury. But I think this is a good time for Kathy to explain what the difference is, Kathy, between medical negligence that causes an injury versus simply a bad outcome.
Yeah.
A bad outcome can happen if your surgeon or your physician does everything right, but maybe your body does not respond in the way that they expected it to.
Yeah.
And you got an outcome that was not good.
Sure.
You never recovered like you thought you would. You know, if it was a cosmetic, it doesn't look like you thought it would. You're disappointed. Maybe you've had a hip replacement and they did everything right and during the surgery, but after it's done, you might still have some pain. You may have some symptoms that you didn't expect. And so maybe sometimes it's your expectations were not met, but that does not mean that the doctor did anything improper or incorrect. It just doesn't meet your expectations.
So on the other side of it, though, it's where they don't live up to what the standard of care is what Clint has told me before. The other side, where you may have a case, is like you look at the situation and say, there are things they should have done that most doctors do, and they didn't.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what I do when I look in the medical records.
See, I could have answered this.
I look in the medical records and I look to see exactly what did they do and when did they do it.
And that's where, yeah, because of your expertise, that's where you can see, okay, wait a second, I know as a nurse, this is what they should have done, and I'm not seeing it in this report.
That's right. Sometimes I'm looking for things that are not written. You know, they may say, I did this, and they'll say, I did this, and I did this, and I did this. But when I look in the medical record, it's not documented. And they really don't have any proof that it was done. If it's not documented, then it's their word. It's not in the paper. It's their word against our word that says But you didn't document
It's
it.
not
We can't
documented.
find it in the record. So how do we know that that happened? So
Wow. As we go to the break, if they don't have it documented, could they have, if it was witnessed by a nurse, someone like that, at least say, well, as a matter of fact, I did see him do that. We just didn't write it down.
that's right.
Sometimes
And
they
that's
may do
why,
that.
as a nurse, if I'm going to look for an action by a doctor, I'm not going to just look in the progress notes that are written by the physician. I'm going to look at the nurse's notes. I may look at
if it's nowhere.
lab work. I may look at the social worker's notes. I'll look all through the record trying to find someone who references that action that the doctor said he took.
And you would think at some point someone would if they did. All right, listen, on that note, we have to take a break because we're up against our first commercial here. When we come back, we'll start taking some phone calls. Robert's on the line. Robert, stay there. We'll get to you when we come back. The number 737-7587. Hey, if you're just not sure, questions or comments about a medical situation and the outcome, give us a call. Clint Kelly and his nurse. Well, she works for him. Kathy Farrell. We'll be back right after this.